Greetings, and thank you sincerely for being here. I appreciate you taking a moment to watch this video, and if you choose to subscribe to my channel, I'd be even more thankful. That one act of support would carry incredible meaning for me. Now let's begin. I'm Martin, and nothing could have prepared me for the day my teenage daughter, just 16 years old, looked me straight in the face and told me she wished I were dead. What started out as an ordinary chat about what she wanted for her birthday quickly descended into a moment that shattered everything, forcing me to confront a painful reality and make one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make as a father. To grasp how we ended up in that place, we need to rewind to when my marriage to Linda, my daughter's mother, began to fall apart. We'd been married for 10 years, and during that time, we welcomed our daughter Ruby into our lives. But over time, what once felt stable started to slowly disintegrate. Tension built up, communication dwindled, and we began to drift emotionally. Back then, I worked as an accountant at a mid-tier firm. I was committed to advancing in my career and ensuring financial stability for my family. Despite my dedication, our financial situation steadily declined. Linda, working part-time as a pharmacy technician, had inconsistent shifts, and her earnings made little difference in addressing our growing money issues. Between credit card bills piling up, the strain of our mortgage, and the everyday costs of parenting, the financial pressure was constant. I began accepting additional assignments and lengthening my hours in an attempt to bridge the financial gap. My extended time away from home became a major source of resentment for Linda. While she acknowledged the necessity of my long hours, she often criticized how absent I'd become. She'd argue that Ruby barely saw me anymore, accuse me of caring more about my job than our family, and act as if I was choosing to stay away. In reality, I was doing everything I could to keep our household afloat. I felt stuck. No matter how hard I worked, it didn't seem to make a difference. The bills didn't stop, our credit continued to suffer, and Linda's dissatisfaction only intensified. I felt like I was failing on every front, as a provider, as a husband, and as a father. The more I tried to fix things financially, the more distant I became from my family, and the more blame Linda placed on me. Then came a shift in Linda's behavior. It started small, barely noticeable, but gradually became too obvious to ignore. She began spending more time out of the house, often offering vague or inconsistent reasons. Simple errands took far longer than they should have, and she claimed to be meeting up with friends. She became secretive about her phone, stepping out to answer calls or reply to messages when I was nearby. Her appearance changed as well. She began purchasing expensive clothes we couldn't afford, visiting the salon more often, and putting considerable effort into how she looked each time she left the house. When I gently questioned these changes, she responded defensively, insisting she deserved to feel good about herself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Month after month, the emotional gap between us widened. Linda's words became harsher, more critical. She no longer tried to collaborate with me in solving our problems. Instead, she treated me like I was the problem. It felt like she had already given up on us and was seeking something better, but not with me. Ruby, who was 9 at the time, could sense the tension. Though she was too young to fully understand, she could feel the unease in our home. She'd ask why there was always arguing, or why I wasn't around as much. I tried to give her comfort, but I couldn't make promises I wasn't sure I could keep. The truth about Linda's affair hit me like a hammer. I discovered messages on her phone, intimate, loving conversations with another man. They spoke about building a future together, about ending our marriage. When I confronted her, she initially denied everything. Then she tried to downplay it, and finally turned the blame on me for going through her phone. She said it was my fault. That if I'd been a more attentive husband, if I had been more emotionally available, she wouldn't have looked elsewhere. Somehow, her betrayal became my failure. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. The affair, the financial strain, and the emotional collapse between us had pushed things past the point of repair. I told her I wanted a divorce, and she revealed she had already been thinking the same. But I wasn't prepared for how hostile and vengeful the process would become. Linda retained an aggressive attorney who launched a full-on attack. She accused me of being an absent father who valued his work more than his child. She claimed I was emotionally unavailable and had created an unhealthy home environment. According to her, the affair had merely been a response to my shortcomings as a husband. What followed was a brutal legal battle that lasted more than a year. We went through endless mediation sessions, court hearings, and a mountain of legal costs that nearly ruined me financially. Linda fought for full custody of Ruby, for spousal support, and for the largest possible share of everything we owned. Her goal was clear: to damage my reputation and leave me with as little as possible. During this time, Ruby was mostly living with her mother, and our time together became scarce and emotionally strained. It became increasingly clear that Linda was influencing Ruby's view of me. During our visits, Ruby would echo things her mother had said, twisted accounts of events, always casting me as the villain. I often replayed past conversations in my head, haunted by the idea that maybe I could have done something differently. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake wondering how Ruby was slowly slipping away from me, transforming into someone I didn't recognize. The most painful part was realizing that everything I had sacrificed, every effort I had made to provide for my family, could be undone so easily by someone else's words. I felt helpless to shield my daughter from the negativity she was surrounded by. I couldn't compete with the story Linda was telling her, couldn't erase the version of me that had taken root in Ruby's mind. It was a quiet kind of suffering, one no one could see, but one that impacted every decision I made as a father. My intentions, however sincere, didn't matter. What mattered was that I was losing my daughter, and I didn't know how to stop it. Seeing my 9-year-old daughter begin to reflect her mother's bitterness toward me was one of the most painful moments of my life. Ruby had started asking difficult questions: why I had mistreated her mom, or why I hadn't cared enough about our family to stay. I did my best to explain things in ways she might grasp, but even then it felt nearly impossible. The hardest part was addressing the negativity she was constantly taking in from her mother without sounding like I was attacking her or being defensive. When the divorce was finalized, as I had feared, the court awarded Linda primary custody of Ruby. I was also ordered to pay a considerable amount in child support. I didn't object. I wanted Ruby to have everything she needed. I was granted limited visitation rights, which allowed me to see her on specific weekends and a few holidays. But the time I was given felt far too little. What made the whole situation even harder to accept was finding out that Linda had moved in with the man she had been seeing secretly while we were still married. While I was reduced to writing checks and seeing Ruby only now and then, she was now living every day with her mother and another man who had quietly taken my place in her daily life. Of all the losses the divorce brought, the most devastating was the distance it created between me and my daughter. The dissolution of my marriage to Linda paled in comparison to the pain of not being with Ruby regularly. Once the legal matters were settled, I threw myself into rebuilding my career and regaining financial footing. The divorce had drained me financially, and I needed to stabilize things, for Ruby's sake, and for my own healing. I avoided dating altogether. My focus was entirely on work and the limited time I got to spend with Ruby. About 2 years later, I started hearing through mutual friends that Linda's relationship with the man she'd left me for had come to an ugly end. It was reportedly toxic and even abusive, and she had finally left him. While I was saddened to think Ruby had been exposed to that kind of environment, I wasn't entirely shocked. It didn't surprise me that someone who'd been willing to cheat might not turn out to be a stable or trustworthy partner. Around that time, Linda began reaching out more often. Her messages were more conciliatory, her tone softer, and she seemed more open to cooperation when it came to co-parenting. It felt like she might have been testing the waters for something more, maybe revisiting the idea of reconciliation, or at least rebuilding a version of the bond we once had. But by that point, I had moved on emotionally. That part of my life was over, and I didn't want to reopen old wounds. When I didn't return her newfound warmth, her attitude quickly shifted back. Not long after, she filed a petition in court, claiming that the support I was providing for Ruby was no longer sufficient. She argued that my income had increased since the divorce and that Ruby deserved a larger contribution from me. After a formal review, the court concluded that the existing payments were appropriate and consistent with both legal guidelines and my actual earnings. Her request was denied. This outcome seemed to reignite her bitterness and hostility. With no success in increasing the financial support or re-establishing any personal connection, Linda appeared to double down on undermining my relationship with Ruby. As Ruby entered her teenage years, she began turning down visits, often citing plans with friends or simply stating she didn't want to come. When she did visit, she was emotionally distant and sometimes openly cold. She began echoing things that had clearly originated from her mother, accusations about how I had treated Linda, and assumptions about my motives. She accused me of being selfish for not giving her mom more money, and claimed I didn't care about her because I didn't visit often, overlooking the fact that my access to her had always been determined by court orders. She wouldn't let me be affectionate, wouldn't allow me to play a real fatherly role in her life. I felt like a stranger whose only connection to her was a bank transaction. I tried to talk to Ruby in a calm and honest way, avoiding any criticism of Linda or delving into the complexities of adult relationships. I explained that divorce is never simple, that both parents make mistakes, but that my love for her had never changed. Still, my words were drowned out by the constant drip of her mother's narrative at home. Even as her attitude toward me continued to cool, I remained devoted to supporting her in every way I could. I gave her gifts for special occasions, helped with school-related costs, and did everything possible to stay involved in her life beyond the narrow terms set by the court. I hoped that, through consistent love and presence, I might begin to mend the distance between us. As Ruby's 16th birthday approached, I was determined to make it memorable, despite the emotional space that had formed between us. I asked what she wanted, and she gave me a simple list: some clothes, a few books, and a small piece of jewelry. But instead of just following it to the letter, I decided to go above and beyond. I bought everything she asked for, but upgraded the items. The clothes were designer, the book list was expanded with titles I knew she'd appreciate, and the jewelry was of much higher quality. I also added gift cards to her favorite stores and some spending money for outings. Altogether, I spent more than 3 times what her original list would have cost. I sent the gifts to Linda's house, along with a heartfelt card expressing my love and pride. But I never heard anything back. There was no acknowledgement, no thank you, no phone call, not even a brief message. It felt like everything I had sent had disappeared into a black hole. The silence hurt far more than I had anticipated. I had invested not just financially, but emotionally, hoping to show her how much I still cared. Receiving nothing in return left me hollow. After about a week with no response, I decided to call Ruby. I wanted to hear her reaction, to know whether she liked the gifts, and to simply connect. But she didn't answer. I tried several more times, leaving voicemails asking her to call me back. Still, there was no reply. Eventually, she picked up, but instead of a warm greeting or even a neutral one, her voice was cold and dismissive. She asked sharply what I wanted. I was taken aback. I reminded her that I was still her father and that we should speak respectfully. What followed was something I could never have prepared for. Ruby exploded with anger, shouting into the phone with a rage that stunned me. She said she wished I were dead, called me a terrible father, and insisted that her mother's new boyfriend was her real dad. She told me she didn't want my gifts, didn't want my money, and didn't want me in her life at all. I was stunned into silence. I stood there, unable to fully grasp what my daughter, my little girl, the one I used to tuck in at night and guide through her earliest moments on a bicycle, had just said. She'd told me she wished I were dead, choosing to erase me from her life in favor of a man her mother had started seeing. Until that moment, I hadn't even been aware that Linda was in a new relationship, much less that this man had taken such a central place in Ruby's life. The impact of her words was devastating, but almost as unbearable was the dawning recognition that this wasn't just the outburst of an angry teenager, nor a passing conflict between a father and his child. It became heartbreakingly evident that Ruby's perception of me had been reshaped, carefully and deliberately, until what remained was not just resentment, but active hostility. This wasn't some heat-of-the-moment insult. It was the result of a steady campaign to push me out of her emotional world, to make me a villain in a story I barely recognized. After she finished unleashing her fury, I calmly replied, "I understand, sweetheart," and ended the call. I didn't try to defend myself. I didn't argue. I didn't let emotion take over. But inside, I was collapsing. I was overcome by a painful blend of sorrow, anger, and helplessness that words could not express. That evening, I made one of the most difficult choices I've ever faced as a father. If Ruby truly wanted to erase me from her life, then I would give her the reality of that absence. I decided I would no longer extend myself beyond what the law required. No more thoughtful gifts, no more voluntary support. From then on, I would provide only the court-ordered child support, not a cent more. Gone were the spontaneous tokens of affection, the funds for school trips or clubs, the extra help with clothing or personal expenses. If she saw her mother's new partner as her father figure, then he could take on the responsibilities I had carried out from love and dedication. I also cut off all direct communication. There were no more calls to check in, no more messages to see how her day had gone, no further efforts to hold on to a bond she had chosen to sever so harshly. I treated our relationship exactly as she'd demanded, as though I no longer existed. The response came faster than I'd expected. Within 3 weeks, Ruby began reaching out, calls, texts, all aimed at finding out why the gifts and extra support had stopped. I said nothing. Her tone began to shift. The initial defensiveness gave way to uncertainty, then to concern. Her voicemails changed. She asked if I was okay, wondered if something had happened, questioned if I was angry. Still, I stayed silent. She had pronounced me dead to her, and I was honoring that declaration. For over 2 months, I gave her no reply, even as her attempts to reconnect grew increasingly urgent. Her messages transformed, moving from accusatory to bewildered, and eventually to deeply anxious. She turned to Linda, pleading with her to get in touch with me. I told Linda that unless it was an emergency affecting Ruby's safety or health, all communication would go through our attorneys. Then came a message that shifted everything. Ruby left a voicemail unlike any before. Her voice was shaking as she spoke of missing our conversations, of remembering the small, thoughtful things I used to do, and realizing how much she had once taken for granted. Her tone was full of sorrow and fear that she had caused permanent damage between us. Nearly 3 months after our last contact, I finally returned her call. The moment she heard my voice, she broke down. Through sobs, she apologized again and again for what she had said. She confessed she had been confused and angry after the divorce and admitted her mother had told her things that cast me in the worst possible light. Only when the extra support stopped did she begin to recognize just how much I had been doing behind the scenes. She also saw that her mother's partner hadn't stepped in to fill that gap, and probably never would. We had a long, open conversation. We talked about the divorce, about how much I loved her, and how things had gone wrong between us. I told her I never stopped caring, but that I could no longer accept being treated with such cruelty. I explained how hearing her say she wished I were dead and claiming another man as her father had cut deeper than she could possibly understand. She listened closely. Her apology came not only for her words, but for failing to recognize what I'd been offering her all along. Ruby told me she finally saw how hard I had tried to be a good father, even through the complications of a broken family. She admitted that her mother's resentment had distorted her view of me. Then, in a quiet voice, she asked if we could start over. if we could try to rebuild what had been lost. In that moment, I realized something profound. Parenting isn't just about showing up or providing financially. It's about teaching boundaries, respect, and the reality of consequences. Sometimes the strongest form of love is demonstrated not through constant presence, but through stepping away. Being a father, I learned, often involves choosing the harder path. At times, love requires withholding comfort long enough for your child to truly understand its worth. I had to believe that Ruby could learn from this experience, and in choosing to step back, I gave her the space to grow. Had I not drawn that boundary, our relationship might never have recovered. I forgave Ruby, not because her words hadn't wounded me, but because she is my daughter, and my love for her is unwavering. Still, I made it clear that things had to change. I would be in her life, yes, but I would no longer accept being treated as if I didn't matter. I laid down new expectations. I would not endure insults, rejection, or comparisons to men who had no meaningful role in raising her. Ruby understood. Slowly, we began to heal. She resumed her visits, and our conversations regained a warmth and honesty that had been missing for far too long. I saw her beginning to question her mother's narrative, starting to recognize how deeply she had been influenced. This entire experience revealed a painful but vital truth. Sometimes the most compassionate thing a parent can do is allow a child to face the outcomes of their own actions. By removing myself, I forced Ruby to experience the void left behind. If I had continued to give, even in the face of rejection, she might never have truly valued our relationship. I also came to understand just how destructive it is when one parent sows division and resentment in a child's heart. Linda had spent years casting me as the enemy. It wasn't until Ruby confronted the silence I left behind that she began to see those lies for what they were. Today, Ruby is 17, and our bond is stronger than it's been at any point since the divorce. She's matured in her understanding of what truly happened between her parents, and she now recognizes the extent of the sacrifices I've made to remain a steady presence in her life, despite the challenges. She's also started to reevaluate the ways in which her mother may have manipulated her perception of our shared history. The period of over 2 months when I chose to step away and remain silent in Ruby's life ranks among the most excruciating experiences I've endured as a father. Every instinct I had told me to act, to reach out, to clarify, to repair what had been damaged and earn back her trust. But sometimes, the most powerful choice a parent can make is to withdraw entirely, allowing the other person to fully experience what they had come to overlook. In time, Ruby began to recognize the difference between a devoted, consistent father and the temporary figures her mother introduced into her life to fill that space. She eventually came to see that the parent who enforces boundaries and expects respect may be the one who loves the deepest. She also came to grasp how profoundly words can affect others, especially when those words are used as weapons against the people who care most for you. I'm grateful that Ruby found the maturity to confront the pain she had caused and took steps to repair what had been broken between us. Not all stories like ours end with healing, but I'm proud that I remained resolute and withdrew my presence when she acted with such cruelty. That decision, though incredibly painful, ultimately became the catalyst for our reconciliation. It forced her to confront the truth without filters or distractions. This chapter of our story ends here. I'd be glad to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and if this message spoke to you, feel free to check out more videos on the channel. Until next time.